Excited? This is our first podcast, George. We have our crack podcast team here.
This is the first podcast. I'm
Yes.
incredibly nervous.
Yes. Well, okay, so this is your second week of being the DA in the 23rd Judicial.
Oh my gosh, that's right.
Isn't that crazy?
That's right.
So I know it's early in the game, but what kind of challenges or surprises have you seen?
Some of the stuff that you probably wouldn't anticipate, like technology stuff, like how do you get your comms director a desk and a chair, the little things,
Podcast.
like where you walk by your office and all that's
Yeah.
in there is an oddly placed podium, the little things, the logistical things. Otherwise, I think things are going great. And what I want to keep telling myself is we can keep this honeymoon going forever, with all the other departments in the county and law enforcement and the defense, but it can't always be like that. So we're going to try to get as much done as we can right now.
And it's a lot has been done in the first 2 weeks. So what are your priorities as you settle in here? And you also talked about hiring the best of the best as your team. What went into hiring that team, and what are you looking to do?
Well, we were fortunate in that the office that split apart from us was one that I had a hand in hiring a bunch of folks. And so a lot of these people that we ended up, I'm going to use the term poaching, which I know it's a priority for the governor to go after wildlife trafficking. I poached these great prosecutors and other support staff. I mean, people that were phenomenal paralegals from the other office because they'd worked for me before. And so the combination of the opportunity to come on to something new and try to make a community that they almost to a person live in, that's a big deal. That plus having worked for me before, they knew what they were getting into and they were like, yeah, I want to give this thing a run. So we had an ability to really stock up with some of the best folks out there in the metro area.
It is a great team. And you were talking about the 18th Judicial District, you were there, and you oversaw some of the most kind of notorious crimes in the history of Colorado. I mean, you got the Aurora Theater shooting, Columbine, STEM school. So you left the 18th after this, and you'd kind of done it. What brought you back to being a DA? Because you went out for a while.
Well, first let's qualify left. Turns out the law made me go. They kicked me out summarily. And then I went on and did some other things. I mean, I hosted a morning radio drive time show. I did some legal practice on the side, a bunch of consulting. But when this new judicial district stood up right where I've lived with my family we're coming up on 30 years here, it was a no-brainer to say, hang on, nobody in the state of Colorado has started a new DA's office that's alive, that can tell us how to do it. It's been back since Kennedy was president. And so I thought, this is a challenge like nothing else. And for me to be able to take it on at a place where everything that's important in my life is here, it made it a passion project, and I'm just glad we were able to pull it off.
And you were saying your goal is to make this the most boring district in America.
That's my hope. Yeah. I mean, I want this to be the safest jurisdiction in the state of Colorado, if not this region of the country, and I think we're well suited to do that. But if at the end of 4 years, people have forgotten who the DA is because they're like, my God, nothing ever happened down here, that's a win. That's a huge win.
It's bad for the podcast, but it is a win.
We'll come up with things to talk about.
So let's talk about your background now. So you are a Colorado kid, or
born,
raised here.
Born in Staten Island, New York.
Whoa.
Oh yeah, to a Queens kid and a mom who was from farm country, Pennsylvania, who met in the Pentagon during the Vietnam War. But after the first shooting in their subsidized housing project or the apartment complex they lived in, so it's really crime that drove me here. My folks said, we want to move west. We want to try to go west. And so I had two potential relatives that were on my mom's side of the family. One lived in Portland, Oregon. He was a teacher. The other was an uncle of my mom's who was one of the original members of the 101st Airborne, who started a roofing business in Lakewood, and Lakewood won.
And you were saying your parents are your biggest influence in your life, which is
oh
great.
My goodness. Yeah, and I mean, I imagine that's the way it should be.
Yeah,
right? Like they should be.
Same with my dad.
And so, my mom passed, back in February of '98. So we're coming up on 27 years since she passed. And she was mighty and put herself, with my dad's help, through law school in her 40s with 3 kids at home, me being one of them. And then my dad is just, and I've said this before, I mean, he's just the most Christ-like guy I've ever met. I mean, he doesn't do a lot of talking about it, but just the way he lives his life and stuff, he's just a good, solid man. So if there's anything I know about right and wrong, it came from them. If there's anything I've discerned about being ethical in the conduct of business, both publicly and elsewhere, it's come from them. The things I screw up, those are all me. You know what I mean? I did that all by myself.
Well, so you also, military is obviously very important. You're
Huge.
Colonel, yeah. And why is that so important to you, and how has that shaped what you do here?
Well, I can't tell you what my dad did growing up to get me interested in wanting to serve the country in uniform. But sometime in high school, I got it in my head that I want to be the best of the best. And I think one of the ways to do that is to join the military and to try to become an officer. And, originally I was hoping to do the Navy. And that may have been a product of the fact that one of the great movies of my high school career, there was a movie called Top Gun. No one's ever heard of it. A guy named Tom Cruise, something like that, planes and such. But as it turns out, that wasn't in God's cards for me because I have some color impairment in my eyes, where the Navy said, and I've been nominated to all 3 academies, Air Force, West Point, Navy, by Bill Armstrong, Dan Schaefer at the time. And he just said that Navy isn't going to be for you because of this color or whatever it is. Meanwhile, the Army, they couldn't care less, man. They sent me to an optometrist who was like, reached into a drawer and said, "What color's this?" And I said, "That's red, sir." And he goes, "What color's this?" And he's like, "That's green." I said, "That's green." He said, "Congratulations." And I'm like, I love the Army. I mean, it's just so simple. It's just so simple. And so I ended up doing that. And I had different dreams for myself. I never wanted to be an attorney. Not at one point in my life growing up, not even after my mom graduated law school back when I was in high school, did I ever think I want to be an attorney. I wanted to go armor. Now, when I was in college, we had just wrapped up Desert Storm Senior. You know what I mean? Desert Storm 1.
Right.
And I saw how that went. And I thought, well, I want to be a combat arms guy. And armor is combat arms. Like, I want to go to war and blow things up. I just don't want to have to walk to get there. So I thought armor was perfect, right? So I was on my way to armor. Yeah. Some senior officers pulled me aside and said, "You talk pretty. Maybe you want to think about doing something else." So I took the LSAT, law school admissions test. And as it turns out, I kick ass on multiple choice. I mean, if the answer's on the page, I'll find it, right? You want to stump me? Make it an essay, then I'll show you how dumb I am. So I got into law school, ended up doing that, going into the JAG Corps, starting to cut class in law school to go be a prosecutor out in Jeffco. They hire me. One thing leads to another, and some disgruntled students walked into a rival high school of mine. I went to Bear Creek. Columbine was the next southernmost high school. And I just happened to be, this is going to sound weird for people who aren't in the game here, but in the right place at the right time for them to say, "Hey, we're assigning you and your docket partner, who is a senior, great prosecutor named Steve Jensen, to handle these cases. You're appearing in front of the chief judge, a guy named Henry Nieto, great guy." And then we were off to the races. So I started doing that, and I thought at the time that would be the biggest, worstest case I'd ever handle, and that was wrong. But you don't know it at the time, right. And then we're, after that, it was a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I mean, folks ought to know, career prosecutor, yes-ish. Like, I haven't just been a prosecutor.
But it wasn't a goal of yours growing up to be a prosecutor.
It wasn't even my goal to be an attorney. Yeah. So I ended up as a prosecutor, fell in love with the job of fighting for victims and right and wrong. I mean, listen, when you're a prosecutor, if everything goes right, you ride off into the sunset wearing the white hat, right? Like, if you're the defense and they have a valuable role to play, this system can't work without competent, qualified, aggressive defense. But if everything goes right for them, a bad guy may walk out of the courtroom into the sunset, right? Like, I don't have that problem because I only get a fight for justice. I only get a fight for what's right. So I did that, and then in 2001, I thought maybe it's time to go out there and make some more money. So I left the DA's office. Some guys flew some planes into some buildings. I got called to active duty. When I got off active duty, I decided if I'm going to die in a terrorist act, I don't want it to be chasing bucks. So I went back to prosecution. I got assigned to do a really weird role on the Kobe Bryant rape case. Yeah. And then I left again to go into private practice, worked for a guy named Dan Kaplis, great mentor. And then ran for office, lost, sent to Iraq as the chief of military justice for Northern Iraq, decided to come back and run again. I won. Some dude walked into a movie theater at the corner of 225 and Alameda and tried to murder hundreds of people. And the rest of this stuff just sort of played out in public after that.
So now that you're here, is this where you should be in your life, you think, right now, running the 23rd?
I have made more money than I make now. And in no way am I saying, hey, I don't have a healthy salary of taxpayer money. Don't hear me say that. I've made more money than I made here, but I've never felt as good about what I do as a lawyer than when I'm here, right? Like I've represented victims, that's satisfying. I have been a defense attorney. I've beaten my office, the 18th, before I became the DA. I was a defense attorney that beat them in trial on a case that we should have won. But nothing has really made me feel as good as one, deploying on behalf of my country, and then two, doing this kind of work.
Yeah, well, it's, I know that Douglas County, Lincoln, and Elbert County are happy to have you here because, it's obvious you have passion about what you do.
I love it.
Yeah, very true. And, you're a CU Buff, so I got to ask you a really important question. Yeah. Is Coach Prime going to leave?
Boy, I sure hope not. And as you know, I've tried to throw that out there on every media interview we've had, like, Coach Prime, please stay. Is there anything we can do? I was out in D.C. recently, and I was at a meeting with Senator Bennett and a bunch of other folks from Douglas County. And, the guy's time is super precious. So they're talking about real things like wildfires, and we're talking about some crime stuff and immigration stuff. And at the end, I'm like, is there anything you can do to keep Coach Prime here? Because CU, since McCartney, has not experienced this kind of, a huge morale boost, a surge in ticket sales. I hope he stays.
I hope he stays. Well, it's a great time to be a Colorado sports fan. You got the Avs, you got the Nuggets.
Did you see that shot Jokic made?
I was watching that game yesterday. I almost called you. I said, I'm not going to bother George.
Unbelievable.
What about the Rockies, though? Can we get Coach Prime to coach the Rockies?
You know what? It can't hurt. No offense to Bud Black, but they can't be worse if Coach Prime goes. And they need to invest in the right players, and we're just not there.
They're not doing it. Well, George, we're coming to the end of this podcast, sadly, but anything else you want to say to your constituents or your fellow folks here working on the 23rd?
Yeah, listen, I want you to keep tabs on what we do for a couple reasons. One, I take great pride in the work that we do, and you should know how your taxpayer money is being spent on an office. And folks don't get this. The most powerful person in government outside of the President of the United States is your local district attorney, because no other person on the planet Earth can start the machinery of government against you with the stroke of a pen than the guy you're talking to right now. So it is important that you follow what I do, you scrutinize what I do, ask questions. And while I'd love to believe that people reach out when we do all the great things, normally they only reach out when we do the bad things, but I'm here for it. So make it happen, and as we continue to go down this road, you'll hear other voices too. We'll get to interview some other people and bring people in to talk about the great cases they've done. But this is going to be a great effort to make this the safest damn community in America.
Love it. So what I'm hearing is, I'm going to give your cell phone number here, and after midnight, if someone has a question, just go ahead and give you a call.
Begins with 911. And
George, thanks so much. Great to talk
to you. Hey,
thanks,
man. Thanks, Tom.
Podcast number 1. We made it through.
And congrats on having a desk.
Thank you. We'll talk soon.